You're grieving the loss of a family member after a car crash, and now you're stuck wondering what legal rights you actually have. You probably have searched for answers online, but every article feels vague or contradicts the last one. And while you're stuck in limbo, the at-fault driver's insurance company is already working to protect them. I'm Chris Blackburn.
And I'm Chad Romey.
We're personal injury attorneys here in Fort Wayne, Indiana. And in this video, we'll walk you through exactly when and how you can bring a wrongful death claim after a fatal crash, so you understand what you're entitled to, how long you have to act, and how to make sure your family doesn't get taken advantage of while you're still picking up the pieces.
So the first question is, the title of the video is, can I bring a claim? Can I recover something from the at-fault party? Yeah, you can absolutely bring a claim when you have a loved one who is killed by the negligence of somebody else. How that process works really depends on who it is that died. If you have a child that died, then a mom or dad or both are going to bring that claim. They're not required to open an estate on behalf of their child. The rules change if it's an adult who dies with dependents on who's going to bring the claim. But typically, if an adult dies, there's going to be an estate that needs to be opened. The certain hoops that needs to be jumped through, who would open that, what the rules are going forward. It does depend a lot on the relationships that are left behind. So was there a dependent? Was there spouses? Was there a spouse or children? If not, one set of rules apply. If so, then a different set of rules apply.
Yeah, so it's not as crystal clear as this person's allowed to. One thing that's somewhat interesting, but then maybe more from we call it a race to the courthouse too. So sometimes there are different people trying to open up the estate. Maybe they've worked with or hired a different lawyer, and it sometimes can become a race to the courthouse to try to get the estate opened and try to serve as a personal representative.
And by a race, you mean a race between family members. So somebody dies, and sometimes families are split on how a case should be pursued. And so you might have aunt or uncle saying, well, gosh, we want to pursue this claim, and maybe for nefarious purposes. Or someone over here says, hey, well, we want to pursue the claim. Ultimately, it doesn't matter who pursues the claim. Any money that is received from it goes into the estate, and then either the will or the state of Indiana determines how that money is divided up in the estate. But if you want to pursue a claim for somebody, a loved one who has passed, the key is to act sooner rather than later so somebody doesn't step on toes and try to take that advantage away from you or right away from you.
So do these cases, how do we prove these in comparison to the typical auto accident where someone's got a back injury? Are they similar?
Very similar. Every negligence action really stems on two things. Can we prove that somebody was at fault for the incident? And can we prove what the harm was as a result of the incident? So was somebody careless, reckless, negligent, and did they cause harm? And typically in wrongful death cases, that harm is pretty easy to prove. However, I've had cases where the death resulted quite some time after, and it was more of a domino effect. Well, this was a person in poor health. This accident caused injury, and the injury just led to them not being able to deal with their other health concerns.
Sometimes lawyers have to be strategic about these types of cases too, depending on the type of wrongful death action that it is and the severity of the injuries, because in some wrongful death actions, there are caps, and it could be a situation where you find yourself from a strategic perspective. Well, how can the family to maximize the value of the case?
When you say caps, meaning the state of Indiana has limited the amount that a family can recover as a result of that death.
Correct.
Based on who the person was. And again, it's always based on who the person was. And by that, we mean, what did they leave behind? Did they leave behind dependents? If you leave behind dependents, that's one set of rules. If you leave no spouse, no children, that's a different set of rules. So, and how you pursue those claims, whether it's a wrongful death or just an injury claim, can impact the value, if you will. And it's kind of crass to talk about a loved one dying and how do you maximize the value. But when you deal with a lawyer, that lawyer is going to be dealing with an insurance company, and it's the only thing that you can get. It's the only language the insurance company or the trucking company, that's the only language they speak. And so ultimately you're going to have to come to a resolution either in front of a judge and a jury or with a lawyer on the phone with the insurance company figuring it out.
And typical fashion, I get a little distracted, get off subject there, but the what we're talking about there is the proof or the causation. So there are certainly, Chad mentioned a case where his client had passed away down the road. Those are questions that ultimately you're going to have to get an expert involved to figure out if that there's a causal connection or a nexus between the death and the actual accident.
Yeah.
Sometimes they're not as simple as an unfortunate traumatic car crash or semi crash where unfortunately there's a fatality at that time.
At the scene, yeah. So how are these cases valued, right? So first of all, there's a cap that you have to look at. Some cases, the state of Indiana is just going to limit what an at-fault party has to pay. But other things that go into it are medical bills, right? So if there's extensive treatment or there's any treatment before the death and bills are incurred, funeral costs, depending upon, again, who the person is that dies, some elements of your case are counted towards value. Sometimes they're not. It really depends on who dies. But you look at lost earnings, maybe lost earning potential. If somebody dies and they were 40 years old and they left behind a family, and you think that person was going to continue to earn money over the next 25, 30 years, you can look at that sort of thing as well.
The earnings capacity sometimes can be an easier element, and especially where you're looking, the value where someone who might be working at a lower type income job, or maybe they were working part-time at Rural King making $18, $20 an hour versus a neurosurgeon who's probably making $1 million an hour.
And $1 million an hour, that'd be a lot of money. That would be a lot. $1 million an hour.
$1 million.
That seems reasonable.
$1 million a year. So in terms of what the losses of earnings capacity is over the duration of that person's life, age is a factor as well, but the type of job is going to be a big factor, especially if they're making $1 million
an hour. Yeah, which is not Rural King. I feel like you'd be in management at Rural King.
I think you'd be the owner of Rural King.
Yeah. Another component for damages is kind of the stuff that you can't measure in terms of dollars and cents. So when you lose a loved one, you're not just losing their income, you're losing them. And so there's a loss of companionship and love and society. And so those are unfortunately something you have to measure when it comes to resolving a wrongful death claim. So that is part of the components.
Yeah, and that's obviously it's kind of akin to pain and suffering, and a lot of the cases that we have, it's the intangible. It's hard to quantify, but there's a lot. It's very fact sensitive, and so when you kind of dive into the story of your clients and the relationships that they've had with their family members, that's where those intangibles kind of come to life.
Ultimately, it doesn't matter, how much money it is. I've never had a single client look at the settlement and say, "Wow, what a great deal." In fact, you get to the end and you take the number that they're looking at to consider whether to accept or reject. And you could multiply that number times any other number, times 10, 100, a million, and you would never have that person say, "Yeah, what a fair trade." You're always going to say, "I would give it all back." Unfortunately, it's calculus that you have to do at some point following something like this. But sometimes you run into situations where at-fault party doesn't even have insurance, right? And so then that's a tough decision. So the easiest route is gosh, when there's insurance on the other side. But if there's not insurance on the other side, well, then we look at uninsured or underinsured coverage, or every once in a while somebody won't be insured or have enough insurance on the other side, and you can potentially make a recovery against that person directly or against that company directly if they don't have enough coverage. So our job is to make sure that we're trying to find those buckets that have some sort of resource in there that can get a family compensated.
So these cases start obviously at the very beginning when the personal representative of the state has been created. So you get an order and the PRs is appointed at that point. What that allows you to do, since our clients are going to be deceased at that point, I can't go request copies of medical records or bills or lost wages or anything that we would need. We need the estate to be opened. We need the PR to then act on the behalf of the estate. And that allows us to start accumulating the documentation that we would need to start working on the case at that point.
But even before the personal rep is assigned, there's still stuff that can be done. So a lot of times in every case, it's important to preserve evidence while it exists. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to send out letters to insurance companies, to potential defendants saying, "Hey, preserve your evidence. Do not destroy videos or photographs or vehicles." So sometimes we're looking to be able to document. We want to download that data, black box, from the vehicle to figure out how fast they were going, how fast our client was going, or the deceased was going. So grief is going to start immediately, but shortly thereafter, if you intend to pursue the claim, you need to be talking to people who know how to do that.
And it's not just car accidents. These wrongs come from, or they can come in many different fashions. Chad, actually, you represent someone, a client who had tripped and fell, and then eventually had really succumbed to her injuries.
Yeah.
So we're not just talking car accidents or trucking accidents. They can be the result of any sort of negligence because of someone else's actions or inactions.
And even if you don't start immediately, if you want to pursue the claim at all, you have to do it within 2 years. There's a statute of limitations there. Sometimes wrongful death cases, let's say it's a drunk driving case. Somebody is out there drinking, goes out, gets behind a wheel, and kills somebody. Usually there's going to be criminal charges that follow that. So the question is, do you have to wait for that criminal case to be done before you would start pursuing a civil case, which is what we do. We work on the civil side of the law.
You don't have to wait. In fact, I mean, we want to get started from the get-go. The criminal case and the prosecution is going to be working on their element. What may happen is you can't get some of the data or the documentation because of the pending criminal action. So sometimes you got to wait for that to sort itself out before you can get that documentation, that evidence to then use and bolster in your case. We'll routinely work hand in hand with the prosecutors. Got some really good working relationships with prosecutors here in town that will kind of tag team on our theories versus their theories to help our clients at the end of the day. Because on the civil side, the only metric that we can get is money, and then on the criminal side, there's a lot more leeway there.
Yeah, it's in theory on the criminal side, what you're getting is justice, and so, but you don't have to wait for that criminal conviction to happen. If the criminal conviction never happens, let's say that person is exonerated for whatever reason, it doesn't mean you don't have a civil case. The burden to prove that criminal case is higher for the prosecutor than what we have to prove in the civil law. But it can cause delays. So I had a case where there was a gentleman that was killed on his motorcycle, and it took the prosecutor a very, very long time. It took them a year to finally bring charges. At that point, we are well into our process, and we had filed suit, and I wanted to take the deposition of the other driver. And at that point, it did cause a delay on our end because the judge would not allow me to even depose the other person until that criminal case was done, because the other lawyer was not going to let her client testify in our case in a way that could jeopardize her freedom, right? Because the prosecutor could have used things she said in our case against her. So, but generally speaking, the criminal case is not going to hinder or delay your case, because usually it happens a little bit faster than what we do.
And some of those things on the criminal side are mostly related to the liability component anyway. And once the prosecution is done and there's either a plea or a criminal conviction, that's really where that evidence can kind of come into play to help bolster the liability arguments on the civil side.
Obviously, what we're dealing with here is on the civil side, and that means we're dealing with insurance companies and insurance adjusters. And most insurance adjusters, in my experience, generally are fairly nice people. I think they're probably even nicer to folks who are not represented than folks who are represented, meaning they're just doing business with us. For you, or for an unrepresented person, they're a salesperson. It sounds a little bit mean, but what I mean is they're trying to get you to sign something that allows them to close the claim. And so most of the time they're being very nice, whether it's a wrongful death case or an injury case. Remember that nice does not mean they're on your side. They are on the side of their insured to try to get a claim resolved.
Even if they know that the case is worth their insured's limits, there's always a component there that part of their job is to obviously protect their insured. But if they can settle a case within their limits, or maybe, okay, well, we know we have to pay this much, but the insurance company's job or the defense lawyer's job is to maybe take some of those coins back and then pay out a settlement that's less than what it's. That's kind of what we're talking about.
Yeah, and they're going to take recorded statements from you. And in wrongful death cases, I don't know how particularly damaging that can be, but you always want to be real careful when you're dealing with the other side. Many times they might very well make an offer. Gosh, you have a loved one that has been killed, and there's a $250,000 policy, and it's a clear-cut case on liability, And so they just say, hey, here's the 250,000 and that's our policy limits. What they might not have told you is, oh yeah, there's another policy on top of that called an umbrella policy. So even if the person is being very nice, you just want to ask the right questions. And many times the right questions are something that you don't know just because you've never gone through it. So it's always real good to get some advice, at least have a discussion with the lawyer so you can figure out what to ask and what not to ask and when to do it.
I think it's always appropriate to consult with an attorney, a personal injury attorney, because most of them, we've discussed this in other videos, the type of work that we do, we're offering free consultation. So the first time you come in, even second, third time, if you want to come in and ask us questions or talk to us on the phone, if that's going to help you, particularly in any of these types of cases. But if, let's say hypothetically, you have a potential or you have a wrongful death action, and the insurance company said to you, well, this is the limit. This is all we have. We can't offer anything more. What should you do at that point? Definitely call in, talk to an experienced attorney like Chad or myself, and we'll be able to walk you through your options based on what the information that you're telling us at the time. Because you don't have to settle for the limits. There are other options. They may not be viable, but there are some other options.
Yeah, and the key is just to pause, right? So I've heard the advice many, many times that when something very significant in your life happens, don't make the immediate decision that, all right, so you hold off on any really big decisions. So my aunt, her husband died, and immediately she was considering selling the house and moving, right? Well, now she is here much further out, and she's so glad she didn't rush to that decision, even though that was her immediate response. And so I have a case right now where clients it's a wrongful death case, and before hiring me, they did some things that are making it very, very difficult for me to pursue the claim. And I understand why. They were grieving, and you're not making good, rational decisions always when you're going through something like that. So I can't go into tremendous detail. It is an active case, but it is creating some headaches. Next steps. So I guess to sum things up, what should the viewer remember from this in terms of what's the call to action, if you will?
First things first would be getting the estate opened. That's gonna allow you to then pursue the case and get the documentation that you would need.
You'll definitely want a lawyer to help you open up the estate.
Absolutely. After you get the estate opened, there are some other things that you could be doing if you're involved in the accident. You're probably not going to be in the right frame of mind, but certainly documenting the scene, taking pictures, talking to the officer.
Gathering evidence.
Right.
So if you're going to pursue this on your own, which again, we advise you highly against, you do have to put everything together. So if you're not going to have a lawyer do it, as painful as it is, you have to start gathering that evidence on your own, and you have to gather it while it exists, which is early.
The other component there is a time to grieve, but sometimes lawyers get a bad name, but a lawyer can be very helpful in these types of cases, because when you want to grieve, there's still a lot of things that can be done. And so the hiring of a lawyer that you trust is going to really allow you to grieve, while the lawyer can then work on prosecuting the case and getting things open and protected for the case in itself.
So early on, you don't have to get your case fully ready. You just don't want to box yourself in by missing some stuff, missing deadlines, missing evidence. If this video helped at all, I want you to watch the next one, because it covers what to do immediately after a serious truck accident in Indiana and the steps that protect your health and your case in the first 72 hours. A lot of people do the normal thing following a truck accident, and that will end up costing you later. So click on that video now and we'll walk you through it. So we'll see you over there.